Greetings again, my fellow board game enthusiast, and welcome to part 6.2 of the Aeon's End lore series. We'll be starting immediately where the Outcast campaign ended, with Janna and her companions heading back to New Gravehold in an attempt to settle their differences with Brahma once and for all. It was nearly sunset when they arrived at the Hall of Elders. The chamber was mostly empty, save for Brahma, who sat contemplating how best to raise and protect the next generation of mages. Without hesitation, Janna strode up to Brahma, leaving Takrin, Chu, Ilya, and Kel to wait for her at the door. Upon recognizing her fellow elder, Brahma solemnly rose to meet Janna halfway, though the sun obscured the other mages from her view. Brahma was first to speak, immediately accusing Janna of being a traitor. Janna made no attempts to deny this, and instead tried her best to explain her stance to her fellow mage, but Brahma would hear none of it. At the end of the short-lived argument, Brahma did what she has always done and exiled Janna, threatening to remove her with immediate effect. Enraged at the outcome, Janna swore that exiling her would not be the end of it as she stormed out of the hall. As the group of mages exited the city, Takrin tried his best to calm his mother, for Janna's entire body was trembling in anger. Not at being exiled, mind you, but rather at Brahma's unwillingness to listen to any outside opinion. After a brief discussion, the group concluded that they still needed to take action, though none of them wanted to start another fight with the citizens of New Gravehold, especially not when it was just the 5 of them against an entire city. Janna ultimately concluded she needed to gather more allies from across the world, and that while she was doing so, the other 4 mages should head directly back to the village of Azer, where they would plan their next move. Barely waiting for the others to agree, Janna vanished into the nearby forest. With little else to do, Kel and Ilya guided the party back to the village while using their local knowledge to avoid any Nameless that might be roaming in the area. About halfway there, within the forest clearing, they were suddenly stopped by a void portal appearing in front of them. Out of this portal, a heavily robed being emerged, the Bishop of Scrolls. Speaking in a female voice, the bishop failed to identify herself but happily declares that she is there to help the mages. To help them understand how weak and powerless they are, that is. Moments later, a small army of liquid creatures emerges from the portal behind her, each slowly taking on a humanoid shape. With the bishop's actions clearly hostile, a great battle inevitably ensues. The longer the fight drags on, the more solid and defined the bishop's cherished minions become. Quick side note here. Does anyone else think this one minion looks an awful lot like Spider-Man? Anyways, at the end of the long-fought battle, the mages find themselves on the brink of defeat. That's right, people, there is no auto-win on this campaign, not when the narrative reveals so much more each time the players lose. Throughout the entire fight, the Bishop of Scrolls didn't even break a sweat, and her once oozing minions only grew in strength. Yet just before the final blow could end the lives of our mages, the bishop suddenly snapped her book shut with such force that the sound rippled throughout the forest clearing, beckoning her minions to immediately return to the portal from which they had emerged. Pleased with the results, the bishop thanked her confused adversaries for their contributions in empowering her minions. As she turned to leave, the bishop also mentioned that they would meet again, and that next time she would make Janna see the futility of her crusade. Upon hearing the mention of his mother's name, Takrin demanded to know what the bishop knew of his mother and her plans. In response, the bishop revealed that she knew Takrin's name as well and alluded to a coming war which could not be stopped. Furthermore, she also hinted that her own goals were to save the world by any means, even if that meant others would perceive her as a villain. And with that, the Bishop of Scrolls vanished. Now, if one were to read the background text at this point in the story, it is revealed that aside from Janna and Takrin, she also knew of Zaxos and Mist, as she references a person who experimented with the powers of the Void and another who traveled through the Void portals themselves. Thus, all of these facts strongly suggest that the bishop was once a mage of old Gravehold herself. However, contemplating this further will have to wait a bit, as we have barely scratched the surface of all the mysteries held within the campaign. And much like us, the mages were just as bewildered at the surprising encounter. The best conclusion they could come up with was that the Bishop of Scrolls was yet another exiled mage who had been driven mad by the powers of the Void, just as had previously happened to both Zaxos and Arachnos. The more pressing matter, though, was that the bishop mentioned a coming war which the mages knew nothing about. It might even be that Brahma was gathering up the forces to wipe out all the exiled mages once and for all. Clearly they needed to gather more information to ascertain the truth, and fast. As they were about to hurry back to Azer, Ilya pointed out that if they continued traveling directly south they would have to pass the southern outpost. If the citizens of the settlement had already learned of Takran and chose exile, then that could spell trouble for the party. Deciding it wasn't worth the risk, the mages instead took a detour to the east, towards the small village of Fane which was hidden deep within the swamplands. Much like Azer, none of New Gravehold's citizens even knew of Fane's existence. It was populated by people who had always lived on the surface, including a bunch of tethered mages. Here the party hoped they could safely rest, resupply, and potentially gather more allies. While traveling, the party unexpectedly ran into two familiar faces. The first was an old woman bracing herself with a walking stick, Yen Magda, and the other a girl with starlight silver hair, Indira. After exchanging greetings we learned that Jana had visited Yen Magda's hut only an hour before and instructed her to rendezvous with everyone in the south. The party also filled Yen Magda in on recent events, after which she and Indira wisely agreed to accompany them for the rest of the journey. Yen also mentions that she feels a dark energy emanating from the southeast, the very direction of Fane the mages were traveling towards. Realizing that something terrible could be happening, the bolstered party rushed onwards. When at last they reached the entrance to the village, they were shocked to find it utterly abandoned. The only sounds that could be heard came from their own footsteps as they trekked through the muddy swamp. It was only when they reached the village's center that they came upon the probable cause. Hovering maliciously in the air was a giant purple void portal, easily twice as big as any portal known to have existed. A door slammed in the distance, the sound of which momentarily startled the party, though they were relieved to learn it came from an emerging villager and not a Nameless. Kel stepped forward, recognizing the woman running towards them as a fellow Azerian mage known as Tyresia. Tyresia frantically explained that Fane had been attacked by two Nameless at the same time, overwhelming their mages and forcing everyone to flee. After assuring her friend that they would take care of the threat, Kel and the team readied themselves to engage the fearsome foes which they could now feel slowly approaching from the distance. This was the paradox of myth and bone. One creature, the faceless hulking body known as Bone, and the other the floating golden mask known as Myth. Together these two Nameless formed a symbiotic relationship. On its own, Bone was merely a beast fully consumed by the corruption of the void, driving it into a never-ending frenzy of madness, hate and rage as it sought to destroy anything and everything around it, be it friend or foe. Myth, on the other hand, was a parasite who could do little on its own. However, it did possess the ability to control anything tied by its chains, both draining and replenishing the life force of its host as it saw fit. Thus be it that Bone gave strength to Myth, Myth gave direction to Bone, and together they gave our mages one heck of a hard fight. Eventually the party was able to weaken Bone enough for the Nameless to stumble. Sensing victory close at hand, the mages momentarily dropped their guard. This moment was all it took for Myth to launch an unexpected counterattack, forcing the party to their knees. As Myth was about to launch a follow-up attack which would have wiped them out, it suddenly paused for no apparent reason. Its face slowly tilted to the side, as if it was listening to a voice only it could perceive. Shortly thereafter, Myth passively drifted back through the large portal from which it came. After disappearing into the darkness of the void, the portal closed in upon itself, severing Myth's golden chains which were still tied to the stumbling Bone. The mages could do naught but stare in confusion at the sight. What could have caused the Nameless to halt its assault when its own victory was all but assured? And if it truly had been called back to the void by another being, just how powerful did such an entity have to be to order around a Nameless as if it were a simple pet? Yet these questions would have to wait, as Bone was slowly regaining its balance. However, now weakened and alone, the Nameless stood no chance against even our injured group of mages, who blasted it till only a black husk remained. Though far from what one could call a perfect victory, with the threat of the Nameless now vanquished, some of the villagers of Fane slowly began to re-emerge from where they hid. Tyresia quickly approached the party again, thanking them for their aid, though also mentioning that she next needed to go find the rest of her people who had fled deep into the nearby forest. The party was about to offer their aid when Yen Magda raised her hand, drawing everyone's attention. Similar to how she had previously felt danger coming from Fane, she now spoke of another darkness coming from the west. Takrin realized in horror that this meant the southern outpost was likely under attack as well. At first, Kel and Ilya were hesitant on how to proceed, arguing that the people who lived at the outpost meant nothing to them and could defend themselves with their own local mages. Takrin disagreed, stating that all people deserved to be protected, regardless of which tribe they belonged to. Indira additionally offered up some wisdom that today's enemies were tomorrow's friends. Reluctantly, the two Azerian tethers agreed, and thus, after gathering any supplies they could find, the party set out once more to fight whatever Nameless awaited them next. After traveling hastily through the forest, the group was about to reach the southern outpost when Chu spotted Rip, Razra's ever-faithful companion. It is here we actually learn some interesting lore regarding Rip. For instance, he is not a void minion, but an animal native to this world known as a silvipede, which are usually dangerous feral beasts. Now, for those of you who didn't study linguistics, silvipede is a pretty fitting name as it essentially means silver with legs. Also from the card Rip, Eat, we learn that silvipedes possess the property to turn matter directly into pure energy. Those must be some wicked stomachs they have. Anyways, Rip appeared to be happy to see some friendly faces, turning around and wagging his tail as it gestured for them to follow him. The mages did so and soon came upon Razra herself, finding her sitting on top of a pile of metallic armor. As the party was about to greet her, they heard a strained groan coming from nearby. Upon listening more closely to the noise, they soon noticed the sound was coming from underneath Razra. Turns out the pile of armor was no ordinary stack of metal, but rather the breach mage Thraxer, their recent companion from the journey through the void. As Chu helped her poor companion to his feet, Razra explained that she thought Thraxer was a traitor mage, on account of him swirling with void energy and such. The party did their best to explain the situation to the carefree girl, but it went mostly right over her head. In the end, they at least managed to convince Razra to join their quest, which she eagerly agreed to as it meant that she could, and I quote, kick butt. Meanwhile, Thraxer revealed that he had come from the void to warn everyone of the mass outbreak of portals, and that Zaxos went ahead of him to Azer. With the discussions concluded, our party continued on to the southern outpost once more. Much like Fane, they found the settlement deserted, with a pulsing portal hovering menacingly inside. From this portal poured a flood of hundreds of tiny metallic creatures. This grotesque mound of legs and jaws soon came together into a solid form which looked almost like a woman. The Mother of Rust. Something interesting I quickly wanted to note regarding the Mother of Rust along with its minions Replex and Prodiga, is that other than the Horde Crone Nameless itself, this is the very first time we have seen a mecha-themed Nameless. Now, while the Void can certainly warp and mutate any creature, I don't think it can magically conjure up some advanced high-tech robots. So could this mean that somewhere in the distant past of the world that was, the people who lived at that time had access to these technologies? It would be interesting if we could travel back into the past one day to confirm this. Okay, back to the battle. While each piece of the Mother of Rust was tiny and could easily be crushed, together the seemingly endless flood threatened to overwhelm the mages. And their number wasn't the only thing worrying about these automatons, they also acted together, as if they were part of a single hive mind. Divide and conquer tactics weren't exactly going to work here. Yet despite the odds stacked against them, this time our ever-growing group of mages proved victorious, turning their foe into scattered piles of scrap metal. At the end of the conflict, the party dispersed as they searched the area for any resources that might have been left behind by the people of the southern outpost before they abandoned the place. It was then that Ilya let out a sharp yelp, causing the other mages to run back over to her. She had stumbled upon a Skitron, just barely alive while spasming as it tried to move. While Takrin wanted to kill it immediately, Razra felt sympathy for the helpless critter. She argued it no longer posed any threat to them. Next, Ilya chimed in as well, announcing that Azerian glyph magic had the ability to exert control over it, that they could turn the minion into an ally to keep watch over the area. Takrin and Rarza already knew a bit about glyph magic, having personally been on the Into the Wilds journey where they had to fight plenty of glyph-controlled Nameless, and also that Jana's attempt to control the Necroswarm failed miserably. In their defense, Kel and Ilya explained that when used properly by tethered mages who had practiced it all their lives, having exact control on a small creature was guaranteed. Seeing he was outnumbered, Takran conceded to let the minion live, after which Ilya carved some glyphs of light on its back and imbued it with her power. With that event concluded, the party decided to hurry on to Azer, so they may reunite with Jana and Zaxos and also help defend the city in case another portal had opened nearby. It is here that we get a rather nice quote from Yen Magda, which the players would only experience if they chose to visit Fane before the southern outpost. She mentions that Zaxos had always been a man of many talents, but it was only with age that he learned the skill of defending that which matters most. Not long after, they met up with the very man himself, as they find Zaxos, along with Desmodia and Arachnos, camped out in the woods just outside of Azer. Zaxos explained that a void portal had indeed already opened in Azer, and that he was able to hold off the emerging Nameless, a colossal being with swarms of hands known as the Grief Weaver, for long enough for the citizens to flee to safety. He and his companions had since retreated to their current position where they were stalking the Nameless, trying to find any weakness to exploit. This Nameless, however, was rather unique in that it appeared to only be concerned with devouring the village's supply of magical items. A feat it accomplished by spawning hands around itself like a spreading plague, or a certain creepy curse if you will. By reading the lore of this Nameless we learn two important facts. Firstly, that its craving for magical items and human-like appearance both indicate that the Grief Weaver was once an ordinary breach mage, twisted into its current state by the Fountain of Souls. Just as how the stomach wound on the Night of Shackles identified it as Thraxer, I tried my best to relate any of the Grief Weaver's features to our current list of MIA mages. While the shredded cloth wrapped around its upper body kind of reminds me of the one worn by Nim, it also has a distinct claw as its left hand, which looks eerily similar to a striking feature of Phaedraxa. Either way, I am sorry to say that I was unable to reach a definitive conclusion in this case. Anyways, the second thing I needed to mention was that the lore also revealed that the Bishop of Scroll had known of the Fountain of Souls' existence. In fact, she had created the oozing creatures we saw by pulling their half-formed bodies directly out of the fountain's waters. Alright, back to the campaign. The party concluded that the Grief Weaver had no opening to attack from, hence they decided to go with a straightforward full-frontal assault. Now with the combined forces of some of the most powerful mages in history, our party quickly vanquished their foe. As the Nameless fell, all the fetters it spawned shriveled up and disintegrated alongside it. Our party let out a mighty victory cry, which signaled the return of the Azerians from where they hid in the woods. Kel and Ilya swiftly ran to greet their people and ensure everyone was accounted for, while Takran pulled Zaxos aside to inquire about his mother's whereabouts. Zaxos asserted that Jana had not yet arrived, but that they would be ready to aid her once she did. It became all the more clear that a revolution was at hand, and Zaxos felt compelled to participate in it, even if it meant a personal confrontation with Brahma. To fight not for himself, but for the rights of the people, so anyone might freely walk the path they believe in.